Released at the height of Battle Network's popularity, Mega Man Battle Chip Challenge is an oft-forgotten and overlooked spin-off in the EXE series. It's quite similar to Battle Network proper in terms of appearance, but the gameplay looks a little more like this. This is not a dramatization. And yet, I actually do like this game a lot. Today, we're going to examine why that is, and why this game is still worth at least taking a look at. Mega Man Battle Chip Challenge was developed as a joint venture between Capcom and Inti Creates, the studio best known for Mega Man 9 and 10, as well as the Mega Man 0 and ZX series. Kind of a surprise that the team behind possibly the twitchiest and most frenetic Mega Man platformers also gave us this one-button wonder. It was released between Battle Networks 3 and 4, placing this at peak Battle Network. Battle Chip Challenge's story is just a series of tournaments. You fight through a series of opponents in order, and after you clear all of them, you move on to the next one. No scenarios for each opponent, no exploration, just the fights. The actual gameplay is essentially Battle Network, but without action elements. So instead of drawing random chips every turn and moving around the battlefield to use them, you get to stack a programmed deck exactly the way you want. Every turn, each Navi will take a random path through the deck and use the chips on that path. You do get to have a couple of slot-in chips which you can activate at any tactical moment that might strike you, but aside from that, the battles will almost entirely play themselves. Most fights over the course of the game will literally require fewer than 3 player inputs. Press B to auto-advance the text and actions at the start, and then slot in with L and/or R as necessary. That's it. But you get to have a folder of 30 total chips to complement your program deck. This functions like a side deck in a traditional trading card game. You can swap anything from your folder into your deck in between tournament battles, and those decisions are where the actual strategy and satisfaction come from. Some people really vibe with the idea of the entire gameplay aspect coming from how you set up your deck and folder. Others would not call it a game so much as a sleep aid. I'm sort of in the middle on this one. There are a lot of things I like about the game. While at first it might look and seem like a throwaway cash grab, there's actually a surprising amount of depth in the battle mechanics. The most interesting, important, and unique element of Battle Chip Challenge is the ability to deal damage to and delete the enemy's chips in their deck. In addition to fighting the enemy Navi and attacking their HP, every chip has an HP value, and if enough damage is dealt to a particular chip, it will not be usable for the rest of the fight. You really are challenging the Battle Chip in this one. This does a ton of work toward making the experience more balanced and dynamic. This means there are different strategies you can try out. Pure Navi damage rushdown to knock them out before they have a chance to do anything about it, or throwing as much deck damage as possible to leave them with no real options to fight back, or even stacking your deck with defensive options so they just can't damage your Navi or chips. And I had a lot of fun trying to optimize my folder to have pieces to cover all of these bases, as well as having answers for each elemental matchup, while still working within the confines of my deck's limitations. Every chip has an MB cost value, and your deck has a max MB limit. So you can't just throw all your strongest chips together because they'd be too expensive. This also means that weak early game chips actually retain value all the way to the end, because when you've only got 10 MB left to fill, Shockwave is way better than an empty slot. And I always like when a game finds ways to stop options from being strictly outclassed. They even managed to work in more complex Battle Network mechanics, like different types of panels and their effects, or different kinds of defenses and specific ways to pierce each of them. For example, a breaking chip like Zeus Hammer will smash through a defense like Rock Cube or Guard, but not through Shadow or Invis. Something like Shockwave will pierce through an obstacle defense like Remobit, but not through something like Bubble Wrap. There's an amount of reverence for the source material here that I was frankly pretty impressed by in revisiting this game. In my mind, I'd categorized it as a very simple, straightforward, and easily solvable game that was more Battle Network in aesthetic than substance. But the game succeeds in its Battle Network-itude. If this was a fan game, it'd be a really fascinatingly cool and probably well-respected project. But while this game does show a great deal of respect toward the Battle Network series proper, I cannot claim to you that it is a lovingly made video game. There are some games where it's easy to see just how much the dev team cared about what they were doing and how much love they poured into every environment and animation. This game is not one of them. It's fun to see how much mileage they got out of exclusively reusing existing sprite work and animations, and the couple of new Navis introduced actually fit in really nicely and look great. But at the end of the day, it's very clear that this game's first priority was to be made as cheaply as possible to capitalize on what Battle Network had already accomplished. And fittingly, most of the enjoyment to be had with this game does come in the form of fan service. Collecting recognizable battleships but learning how they work in a different battle system is pretty cool, much in the same way as playing a Pokemon spin-off. I doubt this game would be remembered at all if it wasn't wrapped in such a nice IP. But since it is, I think its biggest draw is probably the fact that you get to play as other Navis aside from Mega Man, and even as operators other than Lan. To me, this game is worth it just because you actually get to play as Eugene the Goat Show. And no, his name is not Chad, that's a different guy. Go back to Kids WB on your CRT television with that nonsense. And in true Battle Network fashion, there's even a little post-game after the credits roll. An extra series of tournaments that lead to an encounter with base.exe at the end, as it always must. But this time, after you best him, he becomes playable. For the first time. Even being operated by Sho. Which, in my youth, was one of the coolest things that had ever happened to me. But the biggest problem with Battle Chip Challenge is the lack of action combined with the lack of stakes. In every tournament, when you lose, you can retry the battle as many times as you'd like without any real consequence, not even having to start from the beginning of the tournament. And with the amount of RNG involved, you can kinda just keep rolling the dice on any given fight, and eventually you'll probably win somehow. The minimal interactivity combined with it literally not mattering whether you win or lose makes it pretty difficult to commit your attention to this game sometimes. It is certainly best enjoyed while watching YouTube videos or something. Maybe this playlist called Uploads by Levinseti is a good place to start. It also tends to feel like the game just doesn't run quite fast enough. Some of these tournaments can take hours to get through just because of the amount of encounters, deck edits, animations, and so on. And there's just not enough going on to feel really great about that time investment. But here's the really interesting thing about revisiting Battle Chip Challenge in 2023. What I have described to you is a game that requires minimal input, is best experienced when distracted, and revolves around collecting characters and 10 rolls of equipment in the form of battle chips. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Battle Chip Challenge is literally a mobile gacha game a decade early. It finally answers the question of what it would be like to have infinitely farmable resources in a gacha game. Or at least it does to everyone whose bank account looks like this. Please, like, subscribe, and turn off your ad blocker. And that answer is, it's pretty fun, but a lot less engaging. It doesn't really keep you drawn in and invested in quite the same way. But as someone whose brain is tragically just a little bit too tickled by the gacha game machine, it's still a satisfying good time. And the reason that I think this is so important is that we know Capcom likes to use the success and momentum of a classic game collection to fund and propel new developments with the IP. Like how Mega Man 11 came out as a direct result of the classic Mega Man collection. With the stellar sales of the Battle Network Legacy Collection, I'm hoping it's a question of when, not if, we get a new game, or new games, in the Battle Network series. And with a skeleton like Battle Chip Challenge already established, I can't imagine why that wouldn't include a mobile game using the Battle Network IP. Think about it. Is any series better set up for this sort of thing? It's literally a game about making connections online and collecting digital goodies to become more powerful, designed around a piece of hyper technology that's kept in your pocket at all times. I really hope that we get more than just a mobile game, but I think not making one would be a huge missed opportunity by Capcom. Like, the gameplay of Battle Chip Challenge is so similar to something like Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, or setting up auto battle teams in Dragalia Lost. I kinda can't believe how close the comparisons go. And those games were pretty well received, at least for a while. So ultimately, is Battle Chip Challenge a good game? I don't think I can say that objectively. But do I like it? I really do, despite the fact that it's certainly very flawed and sometimes did actually help me get to sleep. It reminds me of Battle Network 1 in that it's clearly a first attempt at something, but does have a lot of appeal just waiting to be refined. And I think that it does still have some inherent value, at least for fans of the series. It's worth being revisited, not only for the fan service, but also because of how different it feels against the landscape of modern mobile games. I really do hope we see some new Mega Man Battle Network entries in the near future, and I think a mobile game that's a spiritual successor to Battleship Challenge is a perfect idea for one of them. Did you play Battleship Challenge? Do you want to now? Would you play a mobile game along these lines? Let me know down below, and don't forget to slippity slap, like, and subscribe while you're down there. I'm Levinsetti, and I'll be back soon with more tasty content for you, so till then.